And these specific case studies are about national policy. And then, of course, you will start saying, oh, national policy, nothing is ever implemented. It's only just paper and piles of paper and nothing happens. But not in this session, because we will talk about policy and we will also talk about what that means on the ground and whether actually something changes. And we may even say that it didn't help at all. So you have to stay for this session. It's going to be very, very interesting. And we have 4 cases that will be presented to you. The first one from Dhaka, Bangladesh, talking about PPP, so public-private partnerships for citywide services in Dhaka. 20 million people. Okay, Salima, you will have an opinion about that. And the second presentation will be from Indonesia, another not-so-small country, with a national initiative on FSM implementation. That's also going to be very interesting. And the third presentation will take 20 case studies talking about policy and business and technology by Isabel and Blackett and Peter Hawkins. Our fourth presentation will be about India, and that will be a voiceover. So we'll have the 4 presentations. For each presentation, we'll have 5 minutes, short question and answer. And we hope to have a panel at the end where you can put all your critical, sharp questions. Yes? Good. So let us start with Dhaka, the presentation from Dhaka. So that's Habibur Rahman, who is leading WSUP's Bangladesh work. He oversees the sanitation component, fecal sludge management, and overall planning and implementation of Bangladesh program in WSUP. And he has 17 years of experience, and he's a civil engineer. And joining him is Cameron Dobby, who is executive assistant to the CEO of WSUP, and he develops WSUP's approach to market development. So please, go ahead.
So, good afternoon. Welcome to our presentations.
It's not showing on the screen, it's only showing down here. Apologies. No, it has nothing to do with it.
Hello. Good afternoon. Welcome to our presentations. So, it's a technical problem, I think, so you are not...
Yes. Okay.
So, we need to... So, the introduction, so in Bangladesh, you know, Dhaka, I'll share actually the Dhaka experience in here, the public-private partnership model, what we introduced in Dhaka is a capital city of Bangladesh. It's a mega city as well. So already Kuma mentioned that 20 million people reside there. So, you know, in the Dhaka, it's a densely populated city and a lot of challenges are there, but it's a great for us, you know, we have achieved, I mean, in Bangladesh, you know, the 100% open defecation free country, and that is good for us, but still the 60% people, they use, you know, unimproved type toilet, and, you know, the only Dhaka city is the only city where network-based sewer system exists. So 20% households only they have connection to network-based sewer system, and the remaining 80% they depend on the on-site sanitation facilities. And another thing, you know, the household are mostly depends on you know, the traditional pit emptier, so who are doing the pit emptying service by the long time using some sort of bucket or something like that, posing the significant health risks, of course. It's okay. So in this slide, you can see, so already I've mentioned that the 20%, you know, the households, they are connected, household institution or, so they are connected to network-based sewer in here. So, but the 80% that depends on on-site sanitation, so there is a great demand for fecal sludge management service in here. But, out of this, only the 10% you can see in here. So 1% they served by the safe emptying by vacuum tanker, and 9%, so, the additional pit emptier, they are providing emptying service in, using bucket or something like that. And another interesting thing in here, the 69% people, they have the toilet, good toilet, of course. And the toilet, you can see the hygienic toilet, but they don't have septic tank or any holding containment structure. So somehow they are connected to surface drain or open environment. So these are two things we are trying from the our end. Actually, we are trying to capture these two markets, the huge market in here. So 10%, so we are primarily targeting, and then the 69% through behavior science and other program. So in early 2013, actually we were trying to develop the public-private partnership model. At that time, actually, the mandate was not clear. So in Dhaka, so there is a utility, Dhaka Water Supply and Sewerage Authority, and the city corporation, the two city corporation, Dhaka North City Corporation and Dhaka South City Corporation. So the DWASA, Dhaka Water Supply Sewerage Authority, they are responsible for sewerage, and the city corporation, so they are responsible for surface drain or lane drain, something like that. But if you talk about the on-site sanitation facility, then it is somewhere or nowhere in between. So in that case, so what we did that time actually, so we tried to talk with the different stakeholders, including city authority, city utility, and the sector actors, how we can engage the private sector, and then we were able to develop a, the PPP model. I mean, it's a template, so where the terms and conditions and responsibilities were defined in such way so that the private sector are more encouraged to invest in FSM business. So however, in later, 2017, the Bangladesh government approved the institutional regulatory framework for fecal sludge management. So that is actually, it's one milestone for Bangladesh as well. And now, after piloting the model in Dhaka, we are replicating this model in other part of the country, other 3 cities. And initially, we struggle, a lot of challenges, and we faced a lot of challenges, and we struggle to engage the private entrepreneur in FSM business. But after getting the institutional regulatory framework, so it was easier for us to engage the private sector in FSM services. This is the model actually, so what we are talking about. So in here, so you can see the LEGI, the private operator, and the leaser city utility or city authority. So actually the city authority are the asset owner, so all sort of assets, so infrastructural facilities, vacuum tanker or emptying technology, and the treatment infrastructure as well. So city authority, the asset owner, and they lease those out to the private operator, the LEGI, and private operator, they provide emptying service to different segment of the customers, so low income, high income, and commercial customer as well. So they have the differential pricing strategy. So for low income customer, as in this model, the beauty is, they have some sort of, specific percentage for, they have the clear commitment to serve the low income communities. And against that service, actually, the private operator, they are getting service fee from individual household. And then private operator need to pay, on monthly basis lease fee, and there is a security deposit as well. So this is the model. In here, actually, after getting the contract from city utility or city authority, the private operator, they provide emptying service to the different customer under the brand name, what we call the sweep. So Swift is a mechanical emptying service. So they offer the differential pricing strategy and some sort of things are there. So this the private sector they are now encouraging, and we have already demonstrated the model in different cities. So we'll talk on this in details, the financial analysis, what we have and findings we have. So my colleague Cameron is with me, and he will present the findings of our current model.
Good afternoon to you all, and thank you very much. I know this is a track mainly looking at policy, but we thought it would be valuable to take a few moments to, if we could just keep the slides up. There's a few more. Thank you. I thought it would be valuable to take a few moments to look at some of the financial details and the performance of this model. We thought that would have been of great interest to you. So the foundations of this PPP model that my colleague has shared has started to seriously activate the market for mechanized FSM services. Let's not forget that only about 5 to 6 years ago, it was widely believed that operating an urban FSM service was not commercially viable. Thanks, that's it. Yeah, thank you. So the reality has been far from that, however, and we've seen here that the profits realized in the orange here. So this is from Gulshan Clean and Care, the contractor that operates the sweep contract in Dhaka. They have had 3.5 years, so it's April 15 to January 19, of fairly consistent monthly profits, averaging at about $400 a month, often going up to the region of $700. So it's an encouraging thing that we wanted to share, because many of you who've been working in this sector a lot longer than I have, I'm sure are aware that something like this was perhaps at one stage not thought feasible. So what are some of the characteristics that have allowed this model to work? There's a few there on the right-hand side. The ability to focus on the medium and large customers to have a higher profit margin, and through utilizing a differentiating pricing model. So essentially for the low-income communities, the price per cubic meter of sludge empties is $5.50. For the high-income communities, it is $9. And for the institutions, which are the garment factories, hotels, etc., it's closer to $12. And there's directed efforts, as my colleague shared, to service the low-income communities under this model. And some encouraging key facts on the left-hand side, just to try and show you a snapshot. We're talking about over 11,000 cubic meters of fecal sludge safely managed in the 45 months that the contract's been running, over 250,000 customers served, over $112,000 of revenue earned, and over $20,000 of profit generated. So how are we addressing scale in this model? Firstly, let's be aware that the market is not the problem. Yeah? The Dhaka represents one of the most eligible cities in the world, perhaps, to develop market-based solutions for FSM. 16 million, perhaps 20 million, my colleagues from Bangladesh would correct me, I'm sure, population, and only 20% sewage coverage. The PPP contracting model has proved valuable, and we've replicated it in Chittagong, Barshal, and Rangpur. But there are a range of other factors we must be aware of when talking about assisting the entrepreneur to scale. That means going to those that might have strong expertise in logistical business, solid waste management perhaps, transport logistics, trying to de-risk the barriers to entry for them to get them into the market, generating the correct levels of competition perhaps to activate it further, and seeking out new financing models which could be utilized to support the expansion. There is many variables to running the business effectively, and one of the key variables is price. As you know, one of the most fundamental levers in running a successful commercial enterprise. This next slide here shows you over a 2-year period, September 16 to January 19, the average price per cubic meter for emptied for the 3 market segments. Grey is the low income, orange is the high income, and blue is the institutions. So encouragingly, we can see essentially 3 different market segments. However, there's large variations from month to month. September 16 for the institutional price is up at around $15 per cubic meter, whereas if we move towards January 19, it's lower at about $8. And the costs from month to month are fairly consistent, allowing for variable costs, of course, but this has a considerable impact on the profit that this business is realizing. You know, to scale the business needs profit, and to have profit, we need the correct price. So, and considering a trend, if anything, there's an overall downward trend across the three market segments in the price. Now, this is something that we're working alongside the entrepreneurs to advise them on. You know, inflation in Bangladesh is around 6% per annum, so this is something that is definitely for them to be aware of. So, on to the penultimate slide. Scale is a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. We found that working to be alongside the entrepreneur to help them understand the different market segments, understand how they can differentiate their product is very important. And just finally, the conclusions. The suite model has been successfully embedded through a range of factors, and policy has been the main enabler to allow this. There are considerable opportunities and challenges for scaling, but there are new frontiers which we have to explore, including new financing mechanisms, looking at asset financing, looking at sources of social investment, and looking at how we can expand further and activate those national regulations that my colleague shared. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been honored for me to be standing here in front of what I'm considered as guru, Isabel, Peter, and Antoinette. My name is Aldi Madrikanto. I'm working in the Ministry of National Development Planning. I'm writing this piece with the support from Mr. Emmanuel Ginting, being present here with me, and other two colleagues that cannot be, unfortunately, being here with us. It's a story of the FSM implementation in Indonesia, both from the national and local government perspectives, and in our efforts in achieving SDGs in 2030. Next slide, should I press something here? Or the green button? No. Okay. So why FSM? I think it's understandable, at least for us. We are committed to achieve the SDGs in 2030. There's been a presidential regulations in it, including safely managed as one of the goals for sanitation. Like in Bangladesh, our predominant systems for sanitation is on-site systems. More than 90% of our sanitation system is on-site, with the questionable quality of septic tanks. And the challenge is more than 60% of our population will live in urban cities in 2030, 2035, so it makes it, we realize that it's very important to, when we want to achieve the safely managed sanitation, and it's for on-site sanitation, it's the FSM, that's the answer. My presentation will consist of two big parts. One is the story of what has been happening in our cities. Trying to bring up all the interesting good practices and innovations in our cities. And the second part is sort of what the national government, what we do in responding to these challenges of FSM implementation, and also to provide guidance and at the same time learning from what happens in our cities. So far, to give you a bit of context of Indonesia, Indonesia is a huge country. It's a scattered continent just above the Australia, and we are heavily decentralized. That's why what happens in cities, initiatives, good practices, bad practices, innovations do really matter in Indonesia. As the institutional settings, 50 of our local governments have their local regulations for wastewater management, and 100 of our cities have established their own wastewater management operators. Private engagement in Bandung and Solo City, and also in Muara Enim, they have heavily engaged private sectors when in technical aspects. They're assigning their water enterprises to become the operators for regular desludging. And in Muara Enim, it's, the engagement is on corporate social responsibility to support the city and its households for improvements of their septic tanks and also to support this, their regular desludging. For cashless payment, this is one of the innovations in Bekasi. It's near Jakarta, our capital. They've had a cooperation with one of the national big banks so that they provide cashless payment. The driver and the crew would bring the EDC like machine, tools, whatever, so that the customer they don't want to pay for with card, it's possible. Next innovation, I think it's the use of ICT, information and communication technology for customer data and service management. In Makassar, in Gresik, they established an Android app space for septic tank census, which, well, available on Android-based phone, which connects to web-based portal. In Makassar, in one of our largest city in Indonesia, in Sulawesi Island, they have an online system for information management for their customers. So here, I give you a screenshot of the website. It consists of all the contacts of, I should have blurred this actually, but I'm sure you can't see this in detail, right? These are all the contacts of the customers in Makassar for regular desludging. They have the names, address, phone numbers to contacts, and also the time where they should have the regular desludging performed. Also, we are strengthening sustainability of behavior change by strengthening social norms. In these cities, at least, there are massive movement through public engagement. And what is interesting is actually some of them engage directly their mayors to initiate and to perform the massive campaign. One of my personal favorite program is actually the amnesty. It's piggybacking the name of our program in tax amnesty of our national government. It's called Septic Tank Amnesty. So basically, the households that admits that they have a questionable septic tanks to the local governments would receive a support from the local governments to improve their septic tanks quality. We also engage in these cities, civil societies, religious leaders, youth groups, and also this is also one of the huge thing happening in Indonesia is the use of Islamic contribution funds, but not only the funds to provide constructions of water and sanitation facilities for the poor people, but not only the funds, but also the cooperation between the religious leaders that they would embed some sanitation awareness raising in like preaches in mosques. And other activities to support FSM, for example, we established financial models and tools, SOPs for administration and technical aspects, exposure for, through workshops and trainings, also in manuals and training programs, and also some promotional materials for behavior campaign. And this is the second part of my presentation. This is what the national government does to sort of respond and to learn, by learning from what's happening in our cities and also to give a guidance to other cities. First, the framework. Second, the capacity building and also the assistance. The framework we've been finalizing, and hopefully it will be launched next month. The National Framework for FSM Implementation. It consists of visions, what are our visions and the strategies, our principles of FSM implementation, role divisions between ministries at the national level and also offices at the local level. The ladder for FSM implementation to sort of give like a stepwise approach to the local governments and also to assist us at the national level to assess where these cities have come towards the full implementation of FSM. And also in this framework, we try to introduce some new ideas like embedded, I know maybe it's new for us, maybe not for you, some of you, like the embedded service with electricity or water services or waste management. That's one of the new ideas. What's important is actually these visions and principles will be included in our national and medium-term development, which is on the making of 2020 and 2024. The next activity that we do at the national level is capacity building. Through the support from our development partners and also the Ministry of Public Works that unfortunately cannot be attending the session. We have the guidelines for regular desludging and its modules, and we've already implemented the national training of trainers. We held trainings for national government's officials and also some of the excellent cities that's performed well in FSM implementation, so that they become the trainers whenever other cities require trainings for implementing FSM. And also we try to make it regular horizontal learning between our cities, because it's not anymore time for the cities to learn from the national government, but learn from each other what works and what's not. And also we're establishing a twinning program through Forkalim. Forkalim is an association of domestic wastewater operations. We've identifying 4 main topics that some of the cities that I've mentioned earlier can become a mentor, while other cities that wants to learn become the mentee. Recently launched a month ago. And the third one is assistance. We're going to continue the assistance to our cities and districts through funding, several mechanisms such as the use of Islamic contributions that I've just mentioned earlier, and the transfer of funds from national to local governments, and also the output-based grants and several other mechanisms. We are currently looking at 88 cities and districts with various level of implementation of FSM, and we committed to increase the number since we have another 400 cities to go. Good luck for us. And what's next? It's the Medium National Development Plan. We're going to initiate also a knowledge center and distant learning. It's also boost innovations throughout our cities. What we've learned is actually this intensive facilitation to our cities is a must. We need and we have standardized template for FSM implementation, but we need a flexible approach because our 500 cities are very different, varies between west to east, north to south, its capacity and characteristics. The technical solution is required, but then it needs to be leveraged with non-technical aspects, and awareness raising is still needed to boost innovative and campaign. And we learned that leadership from mayors especially is a must. It's a commitment, a full commitment from the mayors that we're looking at to establish in our cities. It's very challenging, but it's totally doable. With this, I conclude my presentation and give acknowledgement to my main supporters, Pak Danang from USDP, Ibu Maria from SNV, Ibu Ita from UNICEF, and also Pak Ginting here from USAID, IWAS, that makes this possible in Indonesia. Thank you so much.
Any questions? No questions? No questions. Yes.
Can you just speak a little bit more about what this septic tank amnesty is?
Any other question? It's now or never. Okay.
Thank you so much. It's a rather easy questions because if it's difficult, I will go to direct these questions to my amnesty for septic tanks is like I mentioned earlier, it's a piggyback name from tax amnesty, where if households admit that they have a non-standardized and low quality of septic tanks to the government, then they will receive the support from the local governments to improve the septic tanks for a certain period of time. I believe it's like 2 or 3 years. Now it's the second year that the program is existing in some of our cities. But after that, then they will have to go through, well, they have to pay for their own improvement for septic tanks. So they receive for free, basically, if they admit it. So.
Present this afternoon some lessons that emerged. Really, this idea came after FSM4, when we could see these great case studies coming to the fore. So we had produced a document that looks something like this one for FSM4. Some of you may have that, but this is the second edition that came out later that year. And we went back to what we heard and saw and what we had written, and we thought that if we began to analyze across a whole wide range of FSM case studies, we would learn some lessons that everyone could apply. Because at the moment, if you look at individual case studies, you have to read a lot of them to decide which ones apply in your situation. So by looking at this, we thought, if we look very broadly across well-established ones, like perhaps Durban and Malaysia and the Philippines, and then lots of these emerging ones that we're hearing about now, that are going well, we look at country programs like Indonesia, and that Indonesia is one of them, and the Bangladesh is one of our case studies as well. And we look at individual cities. We look across regions of Asia and various regions in Africa. We could begin to learn general lessons about what you should do, what you should always do. Things that might work and you should seriously consider them, and what we think is probably best you avoid, because everyone is telling us these things don't work. So that's what this presentation is about. I can't see that there. All right. So, first of all, this is awkward. Advocacy. Everyone talked about advocacy. Developing policy and regulation. We've already heard a lot about that this morning. We've heard a lot about this afternoon. Building an effective institutional basis. Someone in the plenary this morning said, we're not making, I think it was Kitch, we're not making progress because the enabling environment is not there. We can understand that. About marketing and about FSM service delivery, and then some overall conclusions. And those shaded areas are the ones you've already heard about, you're going to hear more about. And the other ones, I think that marketing is something we want to emphasize because it came out very clearly. First of all, advocacy is about getting people on board, informing people and motivating them, and at the same time building partnerships. It's not about advocating just to one stakeholder, but across stakeholders. Use evidence. Everyone said use evidence and use that as an opportunity to teach people and to learn. Fecal waste flow diagrams, I think everyone must know what they are by now. Everyone said they're effective, they're useful. People get them. You can talk to non-technical audiences. Money spent on high-quality communications, and I looked at that Indonesia one. They're good at doing communications. They know communications. You're trying to say something, sorry. High-quality communications and media, that's budget well spent. It's not being extravagant. It's worth it. Sustain your advocacy efforts. Advocacy isn't something you should budget. Just at the beginning. Okay. I can't see what's going on, that's the problem. I don't want to be looking there, I want to look at you guys.
Yeah, I'll give that to him, and you not to him.
Very good idea. Peter, you know this, so you can continue. I think the other presenters did really well, given the AV challenges. Where was I? Advocacy. Advocacy is not just for the beginning of your program. One of the messages we got from these case studies is we did this at the beginning, and then things began to fade off. We had communications. Then the decision makers changed. We had this continual change of local government officials. So we had to redo our advocacy. So plan to redo your advocacy over and over again, and to keep it going throughout your program. Now, policy. We've talked already, and we've heard a lot about policy. FSM should be part of national sanitation policy. Some countries are doing it on their own, but we would heavily recommend, and the case studies said, integrate FSM into your national policy. Integrate it with sewerage and other forms of services. Base your policy on using evidence, piloting, and local practice, not just international high standards. Don't only look at those countries out there and base it on that. Talk to people. Talk to countries nearby, cities that actually have done something, and work out what's practical. And when you're developing your policy, again, you don't want just a policy group of people doing it in theory or just academics. You want to involve the stakeholders. Really, the officials who are going to have to implement it, the utilities, private operators, CBOs, and applied academics as well. But involve people in getting input into your policy and make it practical. And assume you're going to need a plan, a mix of sanitation types, and FSM will be part of it. All FSM is probably not the right approach. All sewerage is probably not the right approach. And most cases, not even 2 approaches is enough. So assume that. And make sure you cover everybody, even those awkward settlements that are over water, that are informal, that shouldn't be there. Those people still defecate, and they still need a solution. And take an incremental approach. A lot of countries shot high to start with, and they said it was, what can I say? They went for the best, their policy, and everything was the ultimate, and they had to then backtrack. They actually said this was counterproductive. We had to go incrementally, step by step. Next one. FSM regulation, it's rather a similar story. So your FSM regulation should be within a broad framework for the sanitation chain. You don't want to be developing regulations just for one part in isolation. Actually, if you try and do that with FSM, and there's not, for the transport bit, and the containment is not actually working, you're not really going to be able to have your FSM services. Likewise, just planning for containment only and not considering what happens further down the chain also doesn't work. Where they did this, they got good results. Base development of your regulations, again, the same messages with policy on stakeholder dialogue and what is practical. The best regulation that can't be practically enforced, well, you're actually going to lose credibility if you do that. So think about how it's going to be enforced. Who's going to enforce it? What are their incentives to enforce it? FSM operators, in every country, almost every country, no, every country, you have them and they're largely informal. They're very often informal. So a lot we will hear about this week is licensing them and making them part of a formal system is a win-win for them, for government, for the client. FSM operators we've been dealing with, they appreciate it, and that's again what these case studies told us. And systematically enforce in a practical way, use public health regulations when you can. Institutions. I mean, this is a fundamental part of the enabling environment, and I think Aldi had really quite a bit about that this morning, and I've seen in Indonesia this really strong lead from national government. Clear mandates, that's been said already several times today, it's going to be said again. It's got to be clear who's doing what. And that leadership, if you're going to go to scale, it has to be at national level and at local level. And again, I think Indonesia has illustrated that very well. And it's not just about commitment. It's about accountability as well. And it's about the whole sanitation chain. It's all forms of sanitation, including FSM. Leaders and ownership are especially important at local government level, but they will take their lead from what national governments say. I remember in Indonesia us thinking that the absolute support of the high levels at national government, I'm looking at Aldi now, it was necessary, absolutely necessary, but it was not sufficient. Necessary to kickstart things, give people a lead. Local government will follow. So, national lead, but the action will only happen at the local government, so they need the ownership. And it needs to be part of broader urban management, not just standalone. Clear mandates, roles, budgets for FSM. If there is no clear role of who should be doing what, and there's no budget, or if there is a role but there's no budget, nothing's going to happen. And staffing levels. We often find that you get the policy and the paper in place, but the staffing to support it, related to budget, or the staffing without the training is quite a common scenario. And again, these case studies said, when you've got the adequate staffing and you were training them, that's when things began to happen. And the private sector. That's already been mentioned a lot, so I won't mention that. But in all of the case studies, the private sector was critical.
Moving swiftly along, I think these are sort of the reverse part of quite a few of those points that Isabel was making. Possibly this first one takes that a little further, that we're talking about quite major changes here, major changes in institutions and regulations and laws and so on. It takes time. And typically it takes, you know, more than 5 years, more than an electoral cycle, more than a typical externally funded project. And you've got to work out ways of how to kind of bridge those natural bumps in the road which tend to slow down progress. As Isabel emphasized, policy by itself won't make things happen. You absolutely need it, but you also need the means to implement that policy. You need the people, you need the equipment, you need the infrastructure, you need the money to make it all happen. Again, the issue of standards that were too high. There's an interesting example in Malaysia, which was one of the leading countries. In the 70s, they introduced some very progressive regulations saying all new developments, the developers had to deal with the sanitation properly. And what they ended up with was about hundreds of different sorts of sanitation systems. There weren't the technical support services and spare parts and so on to deal with them. Everything ended up bouncing back onto the authorities. They couldn't handle it, and they had more or less to backtrack and start again in a much more systematic way. So it's about, you know, making regulations which are practical and feasible to implement. Regulation in dialogue with service providers. This, I mean, for instance, in Dakar, this was very successfully done. The MTS Association worked with the authorities to produce a very useful regulatory manual. Incremental change, you can't do it all at once. And if you try to aim too far, people just say, can't do it. Or, you know, if you do something, it's breaking the law. So, you know, it makes things very difficult. And, excuse me, the private sector has a big role to play, but they need to be able to make enough money to keep themselves going. And that's something that needs to be balanced. There has been a tendency by some local authorities to feel that, you know, the private sector having it all too easy and they need to be squeezed. It's a delicate balance, but it has to be thought about and it has to be managed. Talking about promotion and marketing, it's of all the features we looked at in these 20 case studies, the single one which ran through every single one of them was that the authors said continuous marketing and promotion and maintenance of behavior change is absolutely critical. And as an interesting example, I think we find particularly in Africa where there's a lot of, and also in South Asia, where there's a lot of manual emptying going on. If you're bringing in improved emptying or improved septic tanks, which don't discharge the drainage, it costs more. And so the improved service has to compete with a cheaper and lower standard service. And that's something that we shouldn't forget in rushing ahead with the improved service, that the old one is probably still there, and if it's cheaper, people are going to be looking at it. One way of looking at marketing and promotion is the 4 Ps. The product should be accessible in terms of emptying. Maybe the response time should be good. There should be minimal disruption. It should be clean. The examples here of the logos you see on the, whatever that is, the right, are from the Maputo campaign where some small emptiers started offering services. You need, obviously, a service has to be at a price that people can afford. As I've said, it may cost more than the old service because you include the critical step of transport instead of just dumping the sludge locally. But if we think about it, sewerage is often heavily subsidized. A lot of public funds may go into building sewers, and then, you know, people say, why should we be subsidizing FSM? It's a tricky argument, and it mustn't be sort of looked at indiscriminately, but ways I think have to be found to make these services affordable, because in some cases it seems that it is possible to serve low-income people. I think the example of Bangladesh is interesting, whereby they have actually forced the service provider to essentially establish cross-subsidies so that the richer customers are paying more, so that the poorer customers can pay less. There are all sorts of ways of doing this. Everybody will find their way. Talking about place, you must be able to find the service. Call centers have been introduced in some places. I don't know quite how successful they are. Mobile phones obviously are around, and if you can get people to call services on there, so much the better. I think it's also interesting to combine services. Again, Bangladesh, they talked about combining fecal sludge management with cleaning. In Kampala, one of the operators sells Sato pans to his customers, which is a nice business line. It also reduces the amount of waste, the solid waste that gets in, so it makes his job easier. In Maputo, the small operators also do solid waste management. And this keeps them visible, and it gives them a second string. Sometimes emptying can be a rather seasonal and irregular business, so these other businesses can keep them there in the marketplace. And promotion, obviously, you've got to go out and sell your product. And I think one of the interesting things here is that as we recognize our particularly emptiers, they gain status, they gain visibility because they can do their work during the day. We make them wear nice, clean overalls. All of a sudden, they're visible and people are seeing them and say, hey, these are not such bad people. And that in itself has been quite an interesting sort of marketing promotion activity. Financing is critical, obviously, and there are various aspects which all need to be made to work together to achieve an optimum result. In no particular order, looking at the technical efficiency so that you reduce costs to a minimum. For instance, some people are using very old vacuum tankers, and these are actually more expensive than new ones because they break down all the time and consume a lot of energy and staff time to run and so on. Definitely judicious use of public funds to build up FSM services. Again, we've heard about quite a lot from Indonesia. Technical assistance and training programs. Obviously the infrastructure, the treatment plants, and I think possibly also helping to capitalize small operators, so finding ways they get access to capital, maybe partly subsidized or facilitated, or working with the banking sector, the small-scale credit sector to facilitate that. Cross-subsidies, richer customers to poor customers, as we heard in Bangladesh, from water to sanitation, which is a very common one. It sort of depends what mix of customers you have as to how you can do that, but it does have possibilities. And you probably need a bit of money up front. People are so used to really lousy FSM services. You can say, oh, it's going to be all singing and all dancing and all wonderful, but until they see it, they're not going to flock in. So you're going to need a bit of seed money to get things moving. And we've heard a lot about, and we will be hearing a lot about, gaining some revenue from reuse products, from fertilizer, from solid fuel, from various other things. This is very important, but I never believe people who say, oh, we're going to run the whole system on the basis of recovering costs. I think that idea is now beginning to go a bit out of fashion, and we're more realistic about it. It's an important source of revenue, one that needs to be developed, and it's obviously ecologically sound as well. But it's not the be-all and end-all. So it's one of many factors you have to put it together. It's like any industrial operation. You have to cut costs, pare down at all possible points. So to summarize, policy is absolutely essential, but not sufficient. And it should be based on practice and wide-ranging discussions. But in addition, the following factors seem to be the ones that came out of these 20 case studies. Firstly, very clear institutional mandates with proper, strong local leadership and adequate resources to manage sanitation, including managing private participation in that. I think this is a bit of an old chestnut, but it's quite tough to get it right. Having strong partnerships between the different stakeholders, there are a lot of people involved, and if they're not talking to each other and working together, the service chains don't work and people don't use the services. And as Isabel said right at the beginning, the whole business of continuous marketing, community engagement, listening to customers, marketing to customers, raising their awareness, promoting improved hygienic behaviors. It's critical, and if you drop this, things tend to relapse, and then when you try and go back again and redo the marketing, it can be really quite difficult. And finally, but last by no means least, is building the capacity of FSM service providers, bringing them out of the informal sector, helping them to deliver better services more quickly. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. You went over way. So we don't have time for questions, but there will be time to ask questions in the panel. I know there will be disappointed people now. Can we have the presentation from India now? This is actually a presentation by Manvita Baradi and Meghna Malhotra from the Urban Management Center. And they lead the LIVES program focused on strengthening sanitation and livelihoods in India, working with both the Clean India mission and the National Urban Livelihoods mission. This presentation is a voice-over because they could not be here. So we've been assured that that works. Could you? Yes?
A very good afternoon to all of you.
More
From Manvita and Meghna, Urban Management Center, Ahmedabad, India. Okay. At the outset, apologies for not being present in person, and thanks for accommodating the voiceover presentation. We'll be walking you through the various initiatives that have been taken for ensuring that workforce engaged across the FSSM chain, whether it's adequately skilled, and what is the situation. We sincerely acknowledge the support from Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, Government of India, and the State Government of Odisha in this initiative. Urban Management Center is providing technical support to the LIVES program.
The FSSM movement in India has seen a leap growth over the past few years. Much has changed since 2011, when the Census of India made available detailed datasets on sanitation. According to this dataset, about 82% of the urban households had access to toilet facilities within their households, and of these toilets, merely a third were connected to a sewer network. Since then, with the Clean India mission launched in 2014, there has been a significant increase in construction of toilets across the country. Several cities and states have been declared free of open defecation as per the Government of India's protocol. The bigger cities in India have large centralized sewerage systems with vast underground pipelines, pumping stations, and huge treatment plants to treat. These systems are, however, expensive to build and even more expensive to operate effectively, as they require continuous power, a large amount of water, and a skilled set of operators and extensive maintenance. Yet, today, approximately 40% of all toilets are connected to an on-site system. Recognizing the importance of FSSM, several states and cities have pledged support. The FSSM policy launched in 2017 aims at achieving 100% safe disposal, and as we speak today, more than 400 FSTPs are in various stages of construction in India.
But as we construct more toilets connected to septic tanks and ensure that there are conveyance systems and there are FSTPs, the overarching issue is to create a workforce to manage FSSM safely. Manual scavenging is one of the biggest challenges of sanitation in India. In very simple terms, manual scavenging is a work that involves directly handling raw or partially treated human excreta. The Manual Scavenging Act was amended in 2013 and brought in a ban on manual scavenging. Despite these amendments, there are still gaps. Across the sanitation value chain, be it the work of cleaning septic tanks, toilet pits, drains and sewers, and other open defecation spots, sanitation workers directly interface with fecal matter in unsafe ways. They are often engaged in the sector through informal contracts, not guaranteed minimum wages, and at times do not have access to safety gears. All this gets magnified due to the caste-ridden hierarchical system in the country.
Under our program, we did a FSSM skills gap assessment study for urban India, which helped identify the potential of the sector for skilling and highlighted the gaps in current skill sets of the people engaged. We estimated that there is almost a need for 650,000 skilled workers in the FSSM sector. This estimation was done considering targets for toilet construction and planning for FSTPs till the year 2023. For skilling workforce in FSSM, our focus has broadly been on two areas. The first is to bring in recognition of FSSM as a critical skilling sector in the existing skilling ecosystem of Government of India programs. And the second is to provide bridge training to the existing workforce. The skill gap assessment report led to identification of specific skill gaps in FSSM sector and helped design specific job roles and responsibilities across the value chain. To enable financial support through federal schemes, UMC worked with the National Skill Development Corporation and the Sector Council Green Jobs and developed qualification packs and national occupational standards.
3 qualification packs or QPs in the FSSM sector have been finalized that provide a comprehensive list of skill set for sanitation workers. The first QP is a skilling for septic tank masons for ensuring that a septic tank that are constructed are of correct design and size. The second QP is a skilling of desludging operators, the people who would be skilled to operate desludging trucks and safely empty septic tanks. The third QP is of FSTP technician and operator who would maintain the FSTPs and be responsible for corrective and preventive maintenance.
This slide shows an example of a qualification pack developed for FSTP technician and an operator. It defines the job role and identifies the responsibilities of the workers. It also lists down various performance criteria, which are an indication of the steps to be carried out for each job component. Apart from the performance criteria, the QP also lists down other soft skills that each worker should have to carry out their responsibilities effectively and to ensure that they are aware of their rights and that they know about other social welfare schemes that they are eligible to. The second strategy for skilling FSSM workforce is to provide bridge training courses for existing workforce through recognition of prior learning. Recognition of prior learning, or RPL, is a skilling vehicle to provide bridge training courses to existing workforce and to help them meet the national occupational standards of the relevant qualification packs. These are typically short-term courses which last 3 to 5 days and they're a mix of classroom and on-site trainings. The workers are also provided a modest honorarium to compensate for their wage loss. Apart from skills training, the workers are also informed of enhanced employment opportunities in the market, their medical checkups are conducted, and they are taught about good financial practices.
Such RPL trainings were conducted in cities of Bhubaneswar and Dhenkanal in Odisha. At the outset, UMC first conducted a TOT of Government and Panel Training Institute. The workshops were then conducted with about 50 workers jointly identified by UMC and the respective city governments. The beneficiaries were given a mix of theoretical and practical trainings, personal protective equipment were distributed, health checkup were done, sessions on safety and health standards and technological advancement in the sector and entrepreneurial opportunities were included. After the training, a third-party assessment was carried out for certifying the participants. Almost 95% of the participants received certificates. The feedback from workers was overwhelming, and the workshop made a positive impact on the group. The trainees started using safety kits while others started demanding them. The workshop also made the workers feel that they were cared for by the government. The RPL training in other cities would help the workers significantly and empower them. Thank you for your attention. Kindly contact us if you have any questions.